Horrible fates often strike when least expected. Yet some individuals manage to defy the odds and survive against all conceivable barriers. These survival stories are a testament to human resilience, showcasing extraordinary strength in the face of unimaginable adversity. From natural disasters to harrowing accidents, these survivors have lived to share their inspiring tales of courage and determination. Mount Nebo, a lush, green sanctuary just 11 miles west of Brisbane, Australia. For hikers and nature enthusiasts, it's a slice of paradise, but beneath its beauty lies a wild, unforgiving terrain. Stretching over 40 miles along the Daguilar mountain range, its dense forests and rocky cliffs are a challenge even for seasoned explorers. On September 15, 2019, this stunning landscape became the setting for one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever told. Neil Parker, a 54-year-old experienced hiker, would find himself battling against unimaginable odds in a fight for his life. Neil wasn't your average weekend adventurer. He was a founding member of the local bushwalking club, someone who had guided countless hikes through Mount Nebo and beyond. On top of that, Neil was part of the Australian State Emergency Service, a team responsible for handling everything from natural disasters to helicopter rescues. He had dedicated years of his life to saving others. But on this day, fate had a cruel twist in store. Neil's plan was straightforward, a solo hike along a familiar route. His destination? A serene waterfall along Cabbage Tree Creek, one he had visited many times before. Confident and well-prepared, he packed his gear and set off into the wilderness. The hike was peaceful at first. The forest buzzed with life, the creek babbled beside him, and the fresh spring air carried the scent of eucalyptus. About an hour and 40 minutes into his trek, Neil reached the base of the waterfall. Towering above him, the cliff face shimmered in the sunlight, its shale surface resembling a natural ladder. Climbing this was second nature to Neil. He tucked his walking poles into his pack and began his ascent, his eyes fixed on the breathtaking view that awaited at the top. But as he reached for a handhold, something shifted beneath his palm. A patch of lichen, weakened by the Australian spring heat, crumbled away. Time seemed to freeze. Neil lunged for another grip, catching a ledge for a brief moment before it too gave way. Gravity took hold, and he plummeted over 20 feet, bouncing off the jagged rock face before landing in the shallow creek below. Dazed and in shock, Neil took stock of his injuries. His left leg was shattered just above the ankle, the foot barely hanging on by soft tissue. His left arm was broken above the wrist, rendering one side of his body useless. He reached for his phone, only to realise the valley offered no signal. As he fumbled to put it back in his pocket, the phone slipped from his hand and vanished into the creek. Neil was utterly alone. Neil's survival instincts kicked in. As someone with years of rescue experience, he knew the grim reality. No one was coming to find him. The dense tree canopy made aerial searches nearly impossible. Worse, he hadn't told anyone about his plans that day. The emergency beacon that could have saved his life was sitting at his ex-wife's house. Neil knew that if he wanted to survive, he'd have to rely entirely on himself. Pushing through the searing pain, he reached for his first aid kit. He splinted his shattered leg using his walking poles, resetting the bone by hand, an excruciating process. With bandages, he tied the splint in place and slung his broken arm. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep him alive. To move, Neil had to improvise. He tied his broken leg to his functioning arm so he could lift it off the ground, preventing further damage. With his right arm and leg, he began to crawl. His goal was clear: reach a part of the trail 2 miles away, where locals often jogged. Inching forward, Neil measured progress in agonizing centimeters. Each pull drained his strength. The uneven terrain, rocks, roots, and undergrowth, made every movement a challenge. To make matters worse, his food supply was limited to a handful of nuts, a trail bar, and some candy. As the sun set on Sunday, a rescue helicopter flew overhead. For a brief moment, Neil's hope soared. but the thick forest concealed him entirely. Exhausted, he spent the night huddled under an emergency thermal blanket. Morning came, and Neil pressed on. Every few feet, he had to stop to catch his breath, his body screaming in pain. What would have been a few minutes' walk became an ordeal spanning hours. He thought of his son, a relationship strained by years of distance. The need to mend those ties kept him moving forward. By Monday afternoon, Neil's absence was noticed. His employer contacted his ex-wife, who in turn alerted friends and family. A friend recalled Neil mentioning a hike earlier in the week, narrowing the search to Mount Nebo. His bushwalking club and emergency service colleagues sprang into action, launching a massive search effort. That evening, Neil reached a clearing by the creek and collapsed under the open sky. He prayed someone would see him. By now, his body was running on sheer willpower. Tuesday morning arrived, and with it, a sound that Neil would never forget. The whirring blades of a helicopter. Mustering his last reserves of strength, he waved his reflective blanket. This time, the rescuers spotted him. A search technician descended from the helicopter, stabilizing Neil and securing him in a rescue basket. As the helicopter lifted off, Neil's ordeal finally came to an end. By the time Neil reached the hospital in Brisbane, he was in remarkably good spirits. Despite his injuries, he joked with reporters and expressed gratitude for the team that saved him. Though his body bore the scars of his struggle, his determination remained unbroken. As Neil fought his way through the unforgiving wilderness, his determination mirrored the courage displayed by Dr. Jerry Nielsen, who faced her own life-or-death battle at the South Pole. Both were isolated in extreme conditions, relying on nothing but their inner strength and resourcefulness to survive. Stay tuned to see how Jerry's incredible story unfolds, proving that the power of perseverance knows no bounds. The South Pole is not a place for the faint of heart. It's a world of extremes, where temperatures can plummet below -100 degrees Fahrenheit, and during winter, there's nothing but darkness for 6 months straight. It's also one of the most isolated places on Earth, home to a small, resilient community of scientists, engineers, and support staff. In 1998, among this group of adventurers was Dr. Jerry Nielsen, a talented emergency physician who had taken on the role of the station's sole doctor. Jerry wasn't just looking for a job, she was looking for a fresh start. After years of working in hectic emergency rooms and going through a difficult divorce, she was ready for a drastic change. When she saw a posting for a medical officer position at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, it seemed like the perfect chance to hit reset. The first few months were uneventful by Antarctic standards. Jerry treated the occasional injury or illness, adjusted to the unique challenges of living at the bottom of the world, and even started to feel at peace in the icy solitude. But everything changed in February 1999, when the last flight of the season left the station. For the next 9 months, the 50-person crew was completely cut off from the outside world. No planes could land, no ships could dock. If anything went wrong, they were on their own. It was during this isolation that Jerry discovered something alarming, a lump in her breast. At first, she tried to dismiss it, hoping it was just a cyst or an inflamed gland. But as a doctor, she knew better. The lump didn't feel right, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Thousands of miles from proper medical facilities and unable to leave the station, she found herself facing a grim reality. The South Pole's medical clinic was equipped to handle broken bones, infections, and other emergencies, but not cancer diagnostics. With no mammogram machine or biopsy tools, she reached out to medical colleagues back in the United States using emails and satellite calls. Her message was clear. What should I do? After intense discussions, the consensus was unsettling. Jerry had to perform her own biopsy. It wasn't just her best option, it was her only option. Determined to save herself, Jerry began preparing. She turned the station's limited resources into a makeshift surgical suite and practiced on raw chicken to master the technique. Her colleagues, though not trained in advanced medical procedures, became her assistants, helping her monitor vitals and ensuring the area was as sterile as possible. When the day arrived, she numbed the area with a local anaesthetic, and carefully guided a needle into the lump. Every movement was deliberate. She knew there was no room for error. She extracted a tissue sample and sent it off for analysis using the station's communication systems. But when the results came back, they were inconclusive. The station's outdated equipment couldn't provide a definitive answer. Refusing to give up, Jerry and her team reached out to the US again, requesting better tools and chemotherapy drugs, just in case. In July, in the heart of the Antarctic winter, help finally arrived. A US military aircraft flew over the station in complete darkness, guided only by a ring of burning barrels lit by the station crew. The plane dropped a package containing advanced diagnostic tools and life-saving medicines. It was a daring and historic mission. The new tests confirmed Jerry's worst fear. She had an aggressive form of breast cancer. She was devastated but resolute. Knowing she wouldn't be able to leave until October, she began chemotherapy on site. With the help of her colleagues, who she trained herself, Jerry started her treatment. Through it all, she continued working. She patched up injuries, treated illnesses, and supported her team, refusing to let her illness define her. Her strength inspired everyone around her, turning what could have been a nightmare into a story of resilience. Finally, in October, the first rescue plane arrived, and Jerry was evacuated along with another crew member who had suffered a severe hip injury. Once back in the United States, Jerry underwent aggressive treatment, including surgery and more chemotherapy. For 10 years, her cancer went into remission. During this time, she shared her story around the world, giving lectures and inspiring countless people with her incredible bravery. She even returned to Antarctica, revisiting the place that had tested her in unimaginable ways. But in 2005, the cancer returned, this time spreading throughout her body. Jerry faced it with the same determination she'd shown years earlier, but this time, the fight was too great. She passed away in 2009, leaving behind a legacy of courage and hope. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more from Horrendous Horror.